Yeah. So sorry, just so learning to dwell, and he's going to be speaking to us on energy value and a first personal approach to ecology. And Jaco and I were just chatting a bit about his approach to ecology, and he'll take you through that. The standard process applies. We'll go for about 40 minutes. Jaco will take us through his presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions and engagement, and then end at 12. So if everyone's happy with that, then we'll continue. Let's just see. And yeah, thanks, Glenn. Don't forget to record. We are now recording. And everyone, I assume that everyone is happy in terms of Popper. We've covered all of those aspects, that you are happy to be recorded, and that we use it for the seminar series. So, Jaco, without further ado, over to you.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, good morning, everyone. It was really an interesting, way somehow that I sort of started joining this seminar. It was an invitation by Andrea, and yeah, I wasn't exactly sure whether I should join or not, and then but it is fascinating. And as Gary has mentioned, I come at this notion of energy pretty much from from a philosophical kind of humanities perspective. I'm currently working on the notion of the home, the house, and the household, and that's why there's this picture of a house in that Van Gogh style there as well. So, of course, the word ecology is derived from the word oikos, and I was thinking of that, and then this seminar series came across my desk, and I thought, well, why not? But it has been quite a struggle, I must say, to really get together. Then initially, when I said, right, I'm going to say everything is energy, everything is value, I had to think quite hard to try and get something to say, but I hope I have something to say to you then this morning. So let me start sharing my screen. I hope you can see that. Let me just, there we go. So energy, value, and a first personal perspective in ecology, or a humanities perspective in ecology. That's what I'm talking about, but I'm going to start by speaking about systems thinking. And Gary has also just mentioned that this complex systems is so what he's focusing on. I must say, so systems thinking is, I'm arriving late at that. I'm coming at systems thinking from this more question of oikology, of this notion of the home and the house and the household. So I'm not a complete expert at systems thinking, though I believe that it is interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, and therefore that should be hopefully a basis for a good discussion. Right, so I observe that systems thinking, has risen to prominence in the 20th century as a kind of a breakthrough, methodological breakthrough in the sciences and research, which enables interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. In systems thinking, you focus on the function of things, how things dynamically interact and work together, rather than an analytical, where you break things down only into their parts and then put them together again. But systems thinking looks at the functions, and the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And that's great. Together with that, you also have, or under the auspices of systems thinking, you have this rise of systems ecology. And maybe systems ecology was one of the earlier applications of systems thinking, along with computer science and things like that. But systems ecology is on the forefront of addressing aspects of the global climate crisis and the planetary crisis at the moment. I'm thinking of this book by Howard Odum. He's one of the pioneers of systems ecology, and already in the 1970s, Odom sort of cautioned against unsustainable practices where we draw on the concentrated energy from millions of years ago, and now releasing that energy into our global ecosystem with the resulting instabilities and so on. So systems ecology is very important as kind of a subsystem of systems thinking. But I want to argue that, you know, the interdisciplinarity that is characteristic of systems thinking and systems ecology is not interdisciplinary enough yet. I think the interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity that we find in systems thinking at the moment and ecological systems thinking extends to cooperation between the natural sciences and the social sciences primarily, but not yet penetratingly enough with the humanities. The perspective remains persistently third personal, whereas I think the humanities perspective is primarily first personal. So what do I mean by this distinction between first personal and third personal? Of course, I have in mind grammatical persons in a sentence, right? Where which person indicates the subject position in a sentence and which person indicates the object position in a sentence. So the third person approach, if you generalize this, the third personal approach speaks consistently in an objective way about he, she, or it out there, right? It's the reference is external. It tries to speak about what is there, what is objective. Whereas the humanities perspective, by contrast, speak from out of the internal experience of the subject. It expresses the inner world of the subject, the world of meaning, of the I, of the we. Here one can think of examples, you know, in literature. Think for instance of Kafka's short story, The Insect, as a kind of an inner experience there, or Dostoevsky, Notes from the Underground. One could perhaps also think of Trainspotting, you know, as a movie. But you get the first person expression also in art. You get, of course, a third personal kind of expression also in art, but you get the first person, you get it in music and in certain forms of philosophy, primarily, or I think thinking of phenomenology, you know, as a description, expression of the life world of the subject. But I'm saying that this first personal approach remains largely absent from the systems thinking as it has developed in the 20th century. And I want to argue that growing interdisciplinarity that we see in today's scientific world, the world of research, can and should still be enhanced by bringing in also a first personal approach, which I now associate with the humanities, into systems thinking and systems ecology. Okay, so this is what I want to suggest. What would this look like now in the seminar on energy? Okay, so I'm thinking that if we bring in this first personal approach into systems thinking, maybe a renewed understanding or a different perspective on the relation of energy and value might come out. And I want to just explore this a little bit further. Okay, what would be now this relation between energy and value if we bring in a first person perspective into systems thinking and ecological systems thinking? Right, so the first thing that you have to be careful of is just when you speak of energy and value and their relation, is just that you don't commit the fallacy of equivocation. I mean, both of these terms, energy and value, are very, very ambiguous. and they are used in widely divergent contexts and with divergent meanings. I'm thinking here, for example, of a word play that's been used earlier in this seminar series. Maybe it was Andrea herself. She asked, where do we find the energy to speak about energy? And also, you know, you can do the same kind of thing with value. What value is there to speak about value or to talk of value? And therefore, one should be really careful in now trying to relate energy and value, that you use these two terms in a univocal way and not equivocally. So what do I mean now when I use the word energy here? I'm going to mean roughly the natural scientific understanding of the phenomenon. So energy is the ability to do work, and energy transfer is the rate of work being done. That's basically, as I understand it, a kind of a natural scientific understanding of what energy is. What about value? By value, on the other hand, I'm going to understand importance. Value is what is important. One could also, you know, to try and relate it to a long tradition in philosophy, you could connect value to the good. When something is valuable, it is important to a valuer. Even if we speak of intrinsic value, I think you can't, without contradiction, really take away the fact that value is what is valuable to a valuer, right? So value is what orients towards it. Value is what motivates, brings into motion, so that one would want to move towards value or to achieve value. To use another metaphor, one could speak of gravity. Value is when something has gravitas. It's heavy, and the valuers gravitate towards it. Value is what modifies one's attitude towards it. Once you somehow realize it, and then you have interest in it. So energy and value, and I want to situate these two as far apart as possible in order to try and relate them now more clearly. However, in trying now to relate energy and value, we're faced with another obstacle. And this is the so-called fact-value dichotomy that has sort of developed since the beginning of modernity. And it's come to dominate our worldview since early modernity. The fact-value dichotomy suggests that there's this very clear separation between the realm of objective facts and the realm of subjective values. And that in the maxim, famous maxim by David Hume, you cannot derive aught from is. What is it is what it is. Don't try to try and derive now how things should be out of that. Conversely, one should not bring in suggestions of ought into the value neutral realm of is. So you have a very clear separation between these two. Now, I think that the fact-value dichotomy is one expression of a wider philosophical development that happened, in early modernity, which one could call the bifurcation of nature. In this word bifurcation, of course, it means forking into two. And I get this expression from Alfred North Whitehead, which I'll also occasion to refer to later on. But I say the dichotomy between facts and values is one expression of a wider philosophical development, the bifurcation of nature. According to this bifurcated worldview, you have on the one hand brute matter or dead matter that should be investigated objectively. And in investigating, in observing matter, one must focus on the so-called primary qualities of matter. What are the primary qualities? They are its extension in space, velocity that it travels through space, its weight, so forth. These are the primary properties or primary qualities of matter that should be focused on. On the other hand, the other side of this fork, so to speak, you have human mind. And human mind, now, according to this bifurcated worldview, adds the secondary qualities to the perception of matter. Secondary qualities are things like sound, taste, color, and so forth, smell. But according to this bifurcated worldview, it's the mind that somehow adds it to the matter. It's these things are somehow in a way in the mind. In René Descartes' famous formulation of all of this, he talked about the distinction between extended substance and mental substance, and that extended substance has no mental properties, whereas the mental substance has no extension or no material properties. So on the one hand, you have the human world of values, of secondary qualities, mental phenomena, and it's also the world of freedom. And on the other hand, you have the world of dead mechanical matter, deterministic, causal efficiency, and so forth, or efficient causality. And one can see how this bifurcated worldview fits in with the separation of an approach. On the one hand, a third personal approach that you find primarily in the natural, or paradigmatically in the natural sciences. On the one hand, it tries to kind of be as objective as possible and third personal as it deals with this matter out there. On the other hand, you have the first personal approach in the so-called humanities that deals with inner experience and first personal terms. Social sciences, I think, are an interesting one in that it tries to kind of straddle this divide, but it somehow has trouble in there. And for the most part, I think the social sciences, your geography, sociology, psychology, and so on, has often tried to move its methodology over to a third personal perspective. Think of behaviorism in psychology, and try to work with data as objectively as possible. So try to move away from this first personal approach. Okay. I think if this is now this bifurcated view of nature, one must also say that since it's first kind of expressions in the thought of Galileo and Descartes and Locke and Hume and Newton, there have also been attempts to overcome this bifurcation of nature. It happened almost simultaneously, and one can think of someone like Spinoza, for instance, that already shortly after Descartes tried to think it more integrated, as attributes of one substance. One could also think of Schelling and so on. And in the beginning of the 20th century, those seismic shifts in theoretical physics with general and special relativity and with quantum physics, where the perspective somehow of the observer already also has an influence on the actual reality that's being observed, right? So it has been complicated from the beginning. But here's the point that I want to make. I agree that to really relate energy and value, one must problematize this bifurcated worldview that we have. And I think, as a philosopher, one could be speculative. I think there is some warrant for speculation in philosophy as a methodology. And one should challenge this bifurcated worldview even to the extent of asking whether we should not broaden our thinking about what matter is, even, you know. Again, there are many philosophical developments that you can sort of relate to. If you want to now problematize this bifurcated nature, or if you want to try and move beyond this, one would be, you know, if you could take your cue from Martin Heidegger with his criticism of the age of the world picture. You could think of the speculative turn in recent continental philosophy with its new materialisms and new realisms, building on the work of Deleuze and Guattari. But you could also take your cue from the work of Alfred North Whitehead. And in the remainder of this presentation, I'm just going to try and, you know, say one or two things about how Whitehead tried to move beyond the bifurcation of nature, and then see if, piggybacking on Whitehead, there's not a way of relating energy and value in another kind of way. As I mentioned, I got this expression, the bifurcation of nature, precisely from Whitehead himself, who, you know, problematized this in order to present his philosophy and his understanding. His famous book, Process and Reality, that sort of appeared in the third decade, I think, of the 20th century. But so what Whitehead suggested is that the basic building blocks of reality are neither pure subjects nor pure objects, but the basic building blocks of reality for Whitehead are what he called concrescences. And the word concrescence means something like growing together. And this again tallies with Whitehead's understanding of philosophy as organic, you know, rather than mechanistic. So in a philosophy of organism, it's possible to think of things growing together, and they have this event-like character in their growing together. But the point is, these concrescences, as he called it, have both an objective side, kind of an data, what is given as objective data, and on the other hand, a subjective pole. And the life of a concrescence, or the life of this event, right, of a concrescence, is a movement from the more objective, as it's being integrated into a subjective perspective or a subjective point of view. And one could also then say that, and this is now not Whitehead, but this is my interpretation of Whitehead, one could say that each and every concrescence has a third personal perspective or side, and it also has a first personal side. And again, as I said, throughout its event-like existence, there's this movement from the objective third personal to the subjective, evaluating first personal side. So Whitehead had a kind of, you know, he understood these concrescences primarily as very, very short spaces, almost atomistically, but they build up into nexes, what he called nexes, that we can experience and, you know, that we see as enduring, for instance, a tree or an animal or a plant or a human or a star or whatever. They're all made up of these concrescences, but they still have this overarching character of concrescence, that they have a third personal objective side and a first personal subjective side. So if one now start to think of systems, you know, think of an ecosystem in terms of these concrescences, and again, I'm going very fast over many steps that Whitehead has taken. One could say that this is now my point. Perhaps one could say that each and every system also has an interiority. Each and every system has an interiority that could speculatively be regarded as first personal, while each and every system also has a more objective third personal describable side, which we usually do when we model systems. We describe it as we model it as if it is out there. Okay, so this is now how I've tried to use Whitehead and just sort of transpose it into systems thinking. How does all of this now relate to energy and value? Okay, in trying to relate this within this now in perhaps broadened understanding of systems thinking, just be reminded that Whitehead, in his attempt to overcome the bifurcation of nature, he started from the human experience. Our human experience has a first personal interior side and a third personal side. I mean, as you know, think of your hand. You basically, when you touch your one hand with the other hand, there's a first personal and a third personal element in there. You touch it on the outside and on the inside simultaneously. This is what Whitehead did. He said, starting from this human experience, let's now speculatively just extrapolate this throughout nature. And we say that all systems, so to speak, in nature has this first person and this third personal side. So he generalized this. In terms of energy and value, we could now say that from a third personal perspective, systems always involve energy and matter, or let's call it matter energy. You almost say it as one thing. Systems always involve matter energy. And in our understanding, scientific understanding, matter and energy are convertible. I mean, think of E equals mc squared. It's really a way of relating matter and energy so that they're almost convertible. So from a third person perspective, from this outside perspective, all systems involve matter energy. But if we now take that next step, then we say, from a first personal perspective, we can now say that those same systems also involve matter value, where matter and where value has to do with importance, with interest, with satisfaction and meaning, and with a unique perspective on the world, from outside of the system looking out, a unique perspective of the world. So try to sort of just schematize that with two overlapping ellipses there. The same system looked at from a third personal perspective is matter energy, but that same system from a first personal perspective is matter value. How can this now be brought into systems ecology? Well, systems ecology, in the work of Howard T. Odum, has to do with the flow and the concentration of energy. Odum's work was already in the 1970s, and he tried to map natural and human and social ecosystems after the fashion of circuit diagrams, and he tried to show where this energy is concentrated, how it is stored, and how it is transferred and dispersed, so on. And he developed this famous notion of emergy, E-M-E-R-G-Y, to kind of put all the energy flows on the same denominator. But I think that this way of describing energy and energy concentration and energy storage in systems still remain third personal. So what if we brought in the first personal, the humanities perspective, and now also conceived of these flows of matter energy as flows of matter value. What if we also conceived of these flows as flows of matter value? If we do this, I suggest that one of the best ways of to express the flow of matter value is according to the logic of gift exchange. Now, to explain the logic of gift exchange is also, it's a big thing. It will take quite long. So I will have to summarize very, be very brief about this. But gift exchange has been described in this book by Godbout and Caillet as the primary social operant or the primary social operator. Gift exchange is the expression of relationality par excellence. And of course, these later, more kind of contemporary studies of gift exchange build on the famous work of Marcel Mauss in the beginning of the 20th century. All of us, from our own first personal experience, are inscribed in gift exchange relations. Just say to be born is already a kind of a gift because no one chose to be born. You somehow, it was given to you that you existed now, right? You didn't choose it in the first place. So all of us, we are already inscribed in this logic of gift exchange, even though this logic has been seriously undermined in the modern world. In the modern world, you find a move to relegate gift exchange to the private realm, to intimate relations between parents and children and so on. And we're very, very wary of gift exchange in the public sector. No, everything must be regulated by the market, transactional exchange, or by the state in terms of, social services rendered by the state. But the gift exchange logic, is not there. Even though one cannot get away from it. I would argue that, this project or this move to relegate gift exchange to the private realm is another way of, another expression of this bifurcation of nature into a value realm and an objective kind of third personal realm. But here's the point, and this is now, I'm starting to wrap up now. A gift is always matter value. Gift is matter value. There's always a material element in a gift. Sometimes the material element is more paramount, as when when you give a toy train to a child. It's the actual toy train that's almost upfront, but the symbolic element, the value element, is always there in terms of the interest, the love of the parents, and so forth. But at other times, the symbolic element is more paramount and the material element is almost absent, as when you greet a colleague at work. It's a greeting, good morning. Hey, that's there. One should conceive of this greeting as a kind of a gift that you give because it's backed up by interest and so forth. But the material element is simply the fact that you as an embodied being is uttering that, right? Okay. The point is, gift evokes counter gift. Gift is always inscribed in gift exchange, in reciprocity. When you give a gift, it expresses the interest, and it somehow is only remain a gift when it's also recognized as a gift by the one that's receiving it, and thereby putting in motion this relationality whereby at a later stage you respond or you reciprocate with another gift, more or less of the same value, whatever, at a later time. And it's kind of practical wisdom not to let this gift exchange reciprocity devolve into a mere transactionality, right? It's practical wisdom or phronesis that's happening there. So one should build out and explain this logic of gift exchange more. But I think when now in systems ecology you map you map flows of matter energy from a third personal perspective. From a first personal perspective, these flows might be conceived as gift exchanges, right? And gift evokes counter gift, and the passing on of the gift, either back to the giver, or passing it on, as when one generation passes on to another generation, um, in cycles of relationality. And so my question is this not what we observe in nature, in the world around us? Is the world not really made up of gift exchanges, circulations of matter value? And okay, the question of violence is something else. Maybe we could talk about that later on. The question is whether we also experience this in our world today, in our worldview. Has our worldview not become so focused on the third personal, that we only think in terms of matter energy, but maybe this should be enhanced or complemented with the awareness of gift exchange as something that happens throughout nature. And it's not two different things. It's the same thing conceived from the first personal or from the third personal perspective. So from the third personal perspective, what flows is matter energy. From a first personal perspective, that is, so to speak, from the inner perspective of the system, what is exchanged is gift, is matter value. And so this is just a proposal then for bringing in a humanities perspective to kind of enhance the interdisciplinarity of systems thinking. And if this happens, I think one could, conceive of the world and of reality as even more relational than before. Maybe this first personal perspective gets at something of the relationality, even though systems thinking is really it's all about relations, but maybe this first personal perspective gets at an element of the relationality that you can't get at if you only look at it from a third personal perspective. And so just to conclude, I think that the current ecological crisis is not only an engineering problem. I think it has been perhaps broached here in earlier sessions, but I think that it's not only an engineering problem. I think the crisis is a crisis also of worldview, and maybe an enhanced interdisciplinary perspective that brings in also this first personal approach might be, some first steps towards a changed worldview. All right, let me stop at that and stop sharing my screen. I just like to hear what everyone, if there's anyone who wants to make a comment or ask a question about that.
Jaco, thank you very much for that. That was fantastic input. Whilst people think about questions to ask, I wanted to just engage with you in terms of this bifurcation of nature. So I often talk about the Western view is that we are separate from nature, whereas the sort of more indigenous African view is that we are part of nature. That we. And so, I mean, what you're basically suggesting is that you bring in the first personal to change this worldview that has kind of been orientated around this third personal. I was wondering if you could just maybe expand on why you think that bifurcation took place. Why it seems to be a sort of, if you can call it a sort of modern development. Why did that happen, do you think?
Yes, Gary, I think it happened. I think it is a modern development in the modern West, modern Western world. And I think it had to do with let's say, the demise of the so-called sacred canopy. If in medieval times, you had a kind of an integrated world, or a hierarchical world with God at the top, and God becomes the God becomes the guarantor, I suppose, of both the subjective and the objective, and so God brings them together, and once God is taken out of the picture, first in deism, and then later on, perhaps just completely dispensing with the hypothesis of God, like Condorcet said, then okay, how do we conceive of the world? And then I think this is what happened. So in my view, it happened at modernity. It's part of that thing of going over from a medieval worldview into, and it has been called also the epistemological turn or the transcendental turn, and things like that. So, but the point is that the human becomes the point of reference now. God or some kind of transcendent isn't the point of reference that keeps everything together. So the human must somehow keep things together, and that of course, there's also the abstraction and the value of abstraction. At the beginning of modernity, people, I think, thought, look, we mustn't lose sight of the success of science. So abstracting the secondary qualities out of matter and focusing on those primary qualities did have a lot of success as well. So one can see why they were led to do that, but we must never lose sight of the fact that this is an abstraction and that reality is in fact concrete. So we use the abstraction, use that focusing on the primary qualities, but don't think that is exactly how reality is.
Yes, awesome. Thanks, Jaco. Jason, I see that you have a hand up. Go for it.
Thanks. Thanks, Jaco. I'm not. Let me say this. I had to come in late due to problems of the concrete absence of energy on my side. So I'm not sure how clearly you were discussing this in the start. So please excuse me for just throwing out a kind of a fellow traveler text. But some of what you were saying, particularly towards the end, struck me. It reminded me of Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a project that has resonances with what you're talking about, because she ends up advocating for or sort of fleshing out what it is to take this syncretic approach. Because it's kind of autobiographical, she speaks from a scientific and the project of trying to rehash her post-epistemicided traditional worldview. But what's interesting to me is by the end of that book, she's evoking this description of seeing the world from the perspective of a gift economy. So I just wanted to say nothing more very useful than that project seems to align with the kind of perspective and the utility of applying that approach that you're going for here. I might be telling you things you already know. But that's what it put me in mind of. Okay,
Jason, thank you very much. No, I didn't know that, so I'll definitely go and look up that book, Braiding Sweetgrass.
I'll put I'll type a little thing in the chat. But it's I think it links to what you're saying, and particularly to what Gary's already said about African indigenous knowledge as well. That these and of course this links with what you said, that the rupture is a Western one, or a particular moment in Western history. Epistemically, I'm quite in favor of many of the side effects of that, but this additional perspective and its use for our interaction with the world. So I think you're onto something. So I just wanted, I suppose I've got one last Parthian shot here, which is I'm wondering if there's specific outcomes or projects that you're interested in developing from what you're doing with this.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yes, that part at least I did reference at the beginning, where I basically talked about this notion of the oikos as a somehow perhaps a humanities perspective on ecology, where the home and that almost inner experience of home and homelessness in modernity and homemaking and so on, you know, might be brought into conversation with a more objective systems approach to ecology and so forth. So that is the larger project that I'm interested in and kind of working on. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Jaco, maybe just to come back to this idea of the gift exchange, would it be accurate to say that the sun is gifting the earth energy? I mean, in terms of your gift exchange, is that how you see it?
I think so. You know, that's now speculation. Speculatively kind of extrapolating this whole logic, which I mean, Marcel Mauss and those earlier sociologists and ethnographers anthropologists who describe this gift logic focused on the human world. But now I think following Whitehead, this is now the move, you know, so following what Whitehead did with his notion of concrescences, let's extrapolate that into nature. Maybe one could say that, you know, Whitehead himself said that he wanted to see the redness of the sun, of a sunset. You know, we shouldn't evacuate that out of and say, oh, it's just particles, you know, and light waves arriving 8 minutes later. It's somehow one integrated, that redness and the beauty is there as well. So I would say, like, we could say the sun is gifting the earth, or is gifting us, and what we are then doing is passing the gift along, so to speak, in the way that we are doing. I was wondering, you know, if one speaks now of this, it seems idyllic, right? And obviously, the one other thing is, though, someone like Odom, for instance, connects his material energy system with competition and the mechanical metaphor of balance. Through competition, the survival of the fittest, you will arrive at some kind of balance between systems in ecology. And now this approach, I mean, it foregrounds relation, not competition. Or I mean, I suppose competition is a form of relation, hey, but it foregrounds interdependence and cooperation. So it's another kind of metaphor if you think of gift exchange throughout nature. But what about violence then? What about the lion catching the antelope to eat? I was wondering whether that could not still be regarded as a kind of a gift exchange. It's only when one starts to, you know, when morality comes in, when there's the gift of violence. Violence is a kind of a negative gift where you really want to break down, where you want to do harm to the other. And perhaps one could argue that violence in that sense is a particularly human kind of thing. But whereas the natural violence that you have in nature is could be still conceived maybe according to that logic of gift exchange. Because after all, the lion will also die and gift its body later on again to the earth, to those nutrients will also go on again. So it's a kind of a, and then that the lion will become a gift for the insects and the whatever decomposes the body again and so forth. So
yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating concept, you know. I mean, because you know, in terms of ecology, it's a passing on of energy continuously, you know. So the impala that's been caught by the lion is passing on its energy to the lion, which, as you say, when the lion dies, it passes energy on. But the lion is also keeping that herd within healthy parameters, you know. So I was just wondering, I mean, do you see, you talked about reciprocity earlier, that we've kind of moved the gift exchange, the gifting into an exchange sort of dimension, whereas the gift gifting in its original sense is just a passing on. It's not there's not a reciprocity that's required.
Yes, I think in modernity we've made, we've made all our relations are procedural and almost impersonal, whereas gift exchange speaks of a kind of almost a relation of interest. If you give a gift, somehow there's something of yourself in there, and the relation itself is also important in gifting. Whereas what we've done in modernity is, as I said, move that into a kind of a procedural sphere. I'm giving you money and you give me that, so it's a transaction.
Yes,
but
yes,
when the reciprocity could be between, one and the other, but it could also be the passing on, I think, of that gift is also a form of reciprocity. If you, in your turn, give again to someone else, it could be regarded as a form of reciprocity. Now, the thing is, one should be wary of saying, of course, that the sun or the lion has a kind of a sense now of value, I suppose, right? Because that was always the problem with Kant and with Heidegger, that animals are world poor. They can't experience these things. So I'm not saying that they have the same sense as humans. I don't think so. I mean, that was also Thomas Nagel's problem. What is it like to be a bat? We have no idea what it's like. What's the inner experience of a bat? But nevertheless, following Whitehead, I think is still some way of saying each and everything experiences, even if it's not consciously, there's some form of experience or feeling in there that one could perhaps relate to the word value. Now, this is my argument that I'm putting out there.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Jaco. I mean, I like this idea of the transactional nature of the relationship, is that we've turned, because ecosystems are relational, as you said, everything is connected. But what we've done is that we've given it a value and we made it transactional, that it, whereas a gift is passed on without the need for a reciprocity, I think. Yeah. Jason, I see you have your hand up again. Go for it.
Thanks. Sorry, I will butt out at some point, but what Jaco just said actually reminded me of the thing that generated the most traction for me about gift economy descriptions, which is precisely that we don't necessarily have to anthropomorphize both ends of an exchange. What's really interesting about, and for me, particularly from a Western transactionally embedded perspective, is the idea that we are fundamentally unbalanced. A gift exchange is a thing we find ourselves in the reception of. We attach a lot of value to the idea of reciprocity, but the experience of seeing the world as providing gifts, including seeing nature as providing gifts and receiving them, is the experience of finding ourselves on one end of an interaction that may not be reciprocable. And it's the question of what we do with that understanding of experiencing those relations. So I think it's really interesting, this idea that I struggle very hard to get out of a transactional mindset when I can imagine myself in a gift-giving situation which requires reciprocity, and I start thinking about what that means. But it's particularly interesting to me that the whole perspectives have existed, which say that our experience of living in a world that bestows gifts on us is to respect the downstream implications of that, but to acknowledge the fundamental. So perhaps this lends itself better to Jaco's area of expertise, because the concepts one reaches toward, or that I find myself reaching toward, are ones that I don't understand well theoretically. Concepts like mystery and grace. And these ideas are interesting because this idea of a fundamental thrownness by the relationship of receiving something and acknowledging that there's some engagement with an ongoing relationship that passes that on, but at the same time realizing that the nature of it is not one that means acknowledging or even believing that there needs to be intention in your receiving it. I mean, many of these things, when we think about the idea of nature as part of a gift relation, we don't believe that it was intended specifically for us. It's just that there's a benefit that comes and a way of acknowledging that kind of relationship. So the very fact that I'm struggling so hard to articulate any of that suggests that there's something very interesting about the idea of an approach which embeds us in these relations. So I suppose what I've fumbled through is yet another reason why I see value in pursuing this project, because I'd love to have a kind of more granular way to articulate all of those things that I see you talking about there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks for your encouragement there. Much appreciated, Jason. And I do agree that, you know, it is on the level of worldview, and maybe there is and we all know there's a new kind of worldview that's struggling to be born somewhere. And it's necessary, but yeah, how to articulate that, that's the question.
Yeah, and on that note, everyone, Jaco, just to say thank you very much to you for the introduction to this to the house, you know, and the oikos, the ecology. I mean, I think you know, I mean, what you're trying to say, but what you're doing is you're saying is let's bring that first personal in, because that's what's been missing in this thing. We split the path some time ago, and you know, when we split it into subject and object, and we kind of put objectivity on a pedestal, you know, and said the subjectivity isn't. And I like your idea of this, the sacred canopy, you know, is that we've, with God's sort of demise, in the sense of it's that we had to replace it with something, and we replaced it with centering humans, and then objectivity within that, you know. So yeah, thank you. That's you're right. We to get this thing right, we have to change our worldview, and it is struggling to be born. So we greatly appreciate that. Any last thoughts from you?
No, thanks for that wonderful summary. That's spot on, Gary. And again, thanks for having me here, and for the interesting discussion. Much appreciated.
Yeah. So Jaco, thank you to you, and then thank you to everyone else. That's it for today. So we really appreciate you joining us. That energy is everything. And we hope Eskom understands that too, and in the next coming while. So yeah, so Jaco, once again, thanks very much, and thanks to everyone else. Have a good weekend, and I'm going to end off the session now. Thank you.